Good evening and welcome to the Gwinnett NAACP July 12th General Membership Meeting. Welcome, everybody. We hope that you are safe. We hope that you are enjoying your day. We welcome you to our meeting. Before we proceed, may we have a word of prayer by our president of our youth unit, 57G, Victoria Chirac.
Okay, please close your eyes and bow your heads with me, everyone. Dear God, we just thank you for gathering us here today, for everyone that showed out and took their time to be here today. We thank you for the efforts of all of our community leaders and all of our community servants. And most importantly, God, I just pray that you can give us the strength and the endurance to be productive in our positions and to actually have impact within our communities, God. And it's in your son, Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
And please pray to your God. Amen. Again, I'd like to, on behalf of our first Vice President, Edward Paul, second Vice President, Hope Dennis, Secretary Adrian Johnson, Treasurer Princess Hawkins, Politin, Parliamentarian Emeritus Pete Toggerson, Membership Chair Angela Whitlock, and the many other people who bring you the services of the community. We, the Gwinnett NAACP, there's just so much to talk about. We want to call this meeting to order. Um, may I have a May I have an approval of the minutes of our meeting from June 14th, 2022? That was video recorded via Microsoft Teams. Can I get a motion from the floor?
I motion that we approve our previous general meeting, which was automatically recorded on our social media pages.
And can I get a second?
Second.
Is there any questions? If no questions, we will note that the ayes unanimously have it, and that those minutes have been approved as requested. Next, we would like to move along because we are having special guests. Today, we will table our meetings, and any of our members who would like to get records or get copies of our meetings can contact our secretary at naacpgwinnett.org. That's secretary at naacpgwinnett.org, and we will be happy to send you any of those copies of our meetings. Now, moving along again, we want to go into our meeting. Edward Paul, who is our PAC chair, I want to introduce him at this time, and we are going to let him open up this segment for us, talking about the new Supreme Court decisions that have come down. Edward? Edward, are you available? Okay. So before we go into that, we're going to take this time to do our announcements. Letting you know that this weekend on the 16th, our youth unit who have been chartered recently will be having a virtual meeting from 12 to 1 on our platforms. You can go to Facebook, you can go to YouTube to watch our youth unit have their virtual meeting from 12 to 1 p.m. this Saturday, July 16th. Also, we're really excited about NAACP, the Gwinnett NAACP, Berean Church in Gwinnett, the State Housing Committee and of the NAACP is sponsoring this event. This is a home buyers seminar to assist people with educating and informing them how to purchase property, specifically here in Gwinnett. And it is also about retaining your property and keeping your property. So if excuse me, if you are interested in purchasing, or if not, please pass this information on to someone else. That's July 30th at Berean Christian Church in Snellville, Georgia. Your NAACP, along with NAACP, a national organization, Berean Christian Church, the State Housing Unit of Gwinnett County, and the State Housing Unit of the State Conference of Georgia, NAACP, will be bringing this to you. And there's more. The next day, on Sunday the 31st, our youth unit will be having their back to school rally for this 2022-23 school year. We will be giving away school supplies. We will be having a DJ. We will be getting pumped up and enthused about our new school year coming up. Again, this will be at Rose Jordan Pavilion 3 this Sunday, from the Sunday, July 31st, from 2 to 4. You will be seeing more information. Please check our websites. And we want you to put on your calendar the 3rd September, in the 3rd Tuesday in September, National Voter Registration Day. So there's a lot. If you can't remember it, please go to our website, and that information will be available for you. Many announcements. If you have announcements, please go to the chat, put them in the chat. We will give you the opportunity later on this event to possibly talk about those announcements and let people know what is going on. Again, our first vice president wanted me to reiterate about the youth units meeting this Saturday, being held virtually from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. on our social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube, with a discussion on Twitter, with YouTube also discussing youth entrepreneurship. So we look forward to you tuning in. Again, you can go to our calendar. We will be uploading this to our calendars. We look forward for you to be in the place attending. Edward, our first Vice President, Edward Paul, would you like to take us into what we will be doing today? Open up this floor and introduce our guests. Edward?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, President Poole. Yes, tonight's discussion will be on the previous Supreme Court rulings, some of the ones that we had seen and been heavily discussed that had to do with affecting abortion or right to privacy. Some of the other discussions that had to do with the Miranda rights, EPA, and then the upcoming rulings, which I think they will rule on in the fall, which will impact state elections and pretty much giving a lot of the state legislature more power to oversee these federal elections and elections overall. So we'll have that discussion today. It'll be more of an open forum to discuss all these different issues. We got some great guests. I'll announce them, just say them all, and then I just bring them all in the room. We have District Attorney Patsy Gaston, State Representative Jasmine Clark, Attorney Maria Banho, and we also have our state president and also an attorney, President Griggs. I also want to acknowledge at our meeting tonight, we thank her for showing up. Our member at large on our executive committee team is Ada Brown. As always, thank you for your hard work and you put in. You're welcome to stay backstage in the discussion. If you got a question, I definitely bring you up to definitely ask any questions you want to ask. So for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and just bring all our guests into the room. Right now, one by one here. And so, all right. So good afternoon or good evening, shall I say. How you all doing tonight?
Good. Doing wonderful. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So yes, we just want to definitely get into a discussion on like some of the Supreme Court rulings, how those rulings is going to impact us here in Georgia. And I guess we just come out the gate and start with the one that, you know, that's probably been on all the main news channels and news stations. I know President Biden, and that's the one that came out on right to privacy, the rights to privacy case that is basically pretty much putting abortion rights in certain states in jeopardy, and also right to privacy, which may affect, you know, other things like, you know, same sex people being able to marry, not same gender loving people being able to marry and things of that nature. So let's start there. Let's not waste any time. I guess we'll start with you, Attorney Maria. I hope I'm saying the last name right. Is it Banjo?
Banjo.
It is Banjo. I thought the J may be silent.
Yeah,
Okay.
no worries, no worries. I get it all the time.
Let's start with you. Just give us a little legal background. I guess you and President Griggs can kind of speak on the legal background. I know, and we'll bring State Representative Clark into that conversation too, because me and her discussed how I was reading that the state constitution in Georgia makes it kind of hard to make the right to privacy to totally get rid of that. But you start the conversation on the legalities of that, and also this new executive order that Biden just written, and what that changes with that too.
Yes, thank you again for having me. And I will actually defer to President Griggs to kick us off with regards to this new ruling, the Dobbs case, how the privacy rights will impact us. But if I know he just hopped on, so I don't want to put him on the spot, I will definitely say a few words. So what I do think that what we're seeing is a major shift. I think we are seeing decades planning, right? Where the court is now politically far to the right and not in alignment with the values of our current society. And so I think that right there tells us that we have a long road ahead of us. And the right to privacy, it is under attack. I do believe that what we need to do is really focus on how are we going to deal with the immediate ramifications, as well as how are we going to plan long term to turn this ship around. So President Griggs, if you want to just chime in here at any time, feel free to.
Absolutely. And thank you again to the Gwinnett NAACP and all the panelists for having me on this panel to discuss the recent developments in Supreme Court jurisprudence. It's kind of interesting that we're having this conversation, and usually, the lawyers on the panel would have robust conversation about, the judicial philosophy of all of these decisions. But really, what happened was the Supreme Court took us back 50 years. And so in the Dobbs v. Jackson health organization, there was a 6-3 ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade and turned it back over to the states to determine whether or not abortions would be legal in this country. And the reason and rationale behind it was writing for the majority, Justice Alito said that there is no constitutional protections for abortions written into the text of the Constitution. And so basically, what's happened now is it's up to all 50 states to make a determination of whether or not they will extend the right to privacy with regard to abortion to the citizens that dwell in the state. And for Georgia, it's very curious in that a few sessions ago, they passed the heartbeat bill, which is currently on appeal in the 11th Circuit, after the district court put it on pause. And so the 11th Circuit is deciding whether or not the district court got it right. So currently abortions are still legal in the state of Georgia. And I believe, based on my reading of the Georgia Constitution, and we have to remember the federal Constitution is the floor of rights which can be given, and a state can give more rights than the federal government. And under the Georgia Constitution, there is a right to privacy. So there is some grounds for continued challenges if the heartbeat bill does go into effect. But we have to be clear. Civil rights are under direct attack. Reproductive rights are clearly under attack. And we have to understand that the court has taken a sharp turn to the right, turning away from 50 some odd years of bedrock black letter law jurisprudence. And we are in a trying time in our democracy. Because the one thing, and I know that the lawyers will agree with me, when they were in law school, when you took your first con law class, they taught you that certain cases were bedrock principle of law. You had stare decisis, which means let the decision stand. You had the belief that there were certain principles that were already established. And so you had 6 justices that just said, we don't believe in stare decisis, and we're going to take ourselves backwards. And so we have to have a real robust conversation about activist judges. And it's usually not the progressives that have this conversation. It's usually the conservatives that had this conversation. And that's why it's good that we're having this robust conversation as the NAACP in a nonpartisan conversation, because if we are truly about civil rights, there are certain civil rights that have been guaranteed for a generation that we must protect. And namely, that's the right to reproductive rights and the right for women to have bodily autonomy. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. Again, the Dobbs decision took us back 50 years. Hopefully in Georgia, because of the protections that we have written into the Georgia Constitution, we will have greater success than other states. But I'm seriously concerned about where we're going.
All right, thank you. And State Representative Clark, I guess from a state perspective, you can talk about those rights and some of the constitutional protections we may have with this.
Yes, so absolutely. So I'm going to start off by saying that I have not gone to law school. So I do not know all the fancy words that Gerald Griggs is using, but I do understand civil rights. So when I first got elected in 2018, my first session in 2019 was when HB 481, which they try to call the heartbeat bill. I call it the anti-choice bill. That bill made its way through the legislature, barely passing, but nonetheless passing. And when that bill passed, it was immediately blocked by the courts. And one of the reasons why it was blocked by the courts was because it was in direct contradiction with the protections we had based on Roe. And so with the Supreme Court basically unraveling Roe or overturning Roe, as it is described, we are now in a position where the argument for blocking it is not necessarily in place. However, I do agree with Attorney Griggs and others that have made the observation that our state constitution actually protects our right to privacy very explicitly. It's we hear all these conversations about codify Roe, and basically codifying Roe would make our federal constitution, or not, I won't say federal constitution, but it will make our laws at the federal level look more like what the Georgia Constitution looks like. So I'm all for it. We have this right to privacy. The issue, however, is that that's still got to go through a judge, and a judge still has to decide whether or not that right to privacy at the state level that is written in our Constitution includes the right to bodily autonomy and the right to make decisions regarding abortion. And so I think that's where we are as far as the situation that we're in. But as Attorney Griggs said, we are in a situation where right now abortion is very much still legal in Georgia. Nothing has changed after the Supreme Court decision, except for the landscape that we are navigating. And the landscape that we're navigating now is that elections do have consequences, and that there are elections that are happening this year that will have consequences. And so I think that's really important, not steering on anyone in any particular direction, but just to understand. I've been hearing people talk about 2024, and I'm like, y'all, we got an election less than 4 months away that's so important for so many basic civil rights that we really have to keep our eye on the prize and understand that, because our state legislatures are going to have so much more power over something like the right to choose. And depending on who's sitting in those seats, we could just straight up codify the right to choose in Georgia, but we have to have the right people in the seats in order to be able to make those types of laws and get them across the finish line.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Representative Clark. I'm going to go to Attorney Gaston, DA Attorney Gaston. For those who don't know, this is our Gwinnett County District Attorney. I read in a recent article that you was one of the many district attorneys across the country who said wouldn't prosecute anyone for getting an abortion. So I guess hearing some of the things you're hearing, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I guess it was some type of letter or some type of,
right.
I don't know the black word I'm trying to use, struggling for the definition, that sort of like a decree that you signed with all other district attorneys about that. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and talk a little bit about
Sure.
that?
Basically, this was a letter that over 90 some odd district attorneys across the country signed in regard to anticipating the Supreme Court doing what they did. And basically what that indicates is that the district attorneys across the country have a level of discretion that we have on to which cases we will prosecute. And I signed on to that letter because I think it's important that a woman's right to her body is guaranteed somehow, because I can't see, it's just like we heard recently about the 10-year-old child that was raped in her family, and they could not get an abortion in the state that she resided in, but they had to cross county lines to do so. So when you have a law that does not take into account mitigating circumstances, then there's a problem there, because as a DA, we have to take into account many concerns. And it may be that someone is mentally ill, it may be that they were abused, self-defense, and it goes on and on and on about the things that we must take into account in order to afford justice. So my position on that paper was that as a DA, it's within my discretion, no matter what political persuasion any particular DA may have, they have that vehicle to use discretion. And I will not be the DA, and many others signed on to it, Metro Atlanta DAs, etc., across the entire country, to indicate that we are not going to be used in that manner. Now, something I did add is that I would look at each case on a case-by-case basis. And that kind of confused a few people, because I think that when laws are ripped out from under people, when you had a 50-year precedent, that there are going to be people that jump in and try to do things that are unscrupulous. And then if that happens, I might have to turn around and use that law against some people that are doing things they're not supposed to be doing, or that they're harming people, or that someone's being butchered. So those are the things I always try to work within a parameter where I'm being fair. I'm looking at all sides of a case and moving forward from there. But I definitely do believe that no matter what my personal belief is about abortion, it's important for women to have that choice. They've had it for 50 years. There's really no reason why it was taken away. And these are just many, many, many things that we have to look at.
All right. Thank you, District Attorney Gasson. Unless we have more questions, I don't see any in the chat about it, specifically about this particular case. We'll move on to one of the next court cases that they ruled on, which was Vega versus Tico, which was on the case involving Miranda rights. I'm gonna come back to my attorneys here on the panel to kind of talk a little bit more about that. Can you all talk about a little bit about the case, get people up to speed of what the case was about? And then, let's educate people on what they should or shouldn't be doing now if they are stopped by the police and not read their Miranda rights, or just stopped by the police, period, and how they should handle that. Things they should say or shouldn't say, really. But go ahead. I don't.
And I'll jump in here because this is one of the bedrock cases that we as criminal defense attorneys have. And really, it's a civil rights case. So basically, Vega versus Tijo, the court ruled that suspects no longer have the right to sue police officers who failed to recite Miranda warnings, and they use the suspect's self-incriminating statements against them in a criminal case. So in this case, it was a civil rights violation because the police officer failed to read Miranda while taking a custodial statement. And I'm going to get to that in a minute because people have a lot of confusion about when Miranda applies. And I know DA Gatson is.
And can you give us a little bit of a line of Miranda, just in case people not
You have
don't
the right
watch?
to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have recited to them? And do you invoke your right to remain silent, or do you want an attorney? Y'all kind of know that by heart. But this really is not a Miranda case. And I think what people need to understand is Miranda is still good law. What the court was saying here is that you cannot sue a police officer for the violation of your civil rights based on him not giving you Miranda warnings. Now, it's still a very dangerous case because we're going down a slippery slope of which cases you can sue under a 1983 claim, which is a civil rights violation under the federal code. But basically what the case says is there's no private right of action for damages of a civil rights violation based on not reading Miranda. Now let's talk about Miranda. Under the Fifth Amendment, you have a right against self-incrimination, which means you have the right to remain silent, which is where Miranda came from. So basically, if you are in custody, which means if you are under arrest, and some lawyers argue if you are detained, but if you are under arrest, the state cannot use your statements against you without first warning you of your Miranda rights, because you cannot be compelled to give evidence against yourself while you're in the custody of the state. And so basically, I know in the movies, they always tell you you're under arrest and then you have the right to remain silent. But the only time Miranda really applies is if you are in custody and they want to question you about the case. It's not just you're arrested, or it's not just you're detained, even though I argue it's you're detained, because under Georgia law, if your freedom of movement has been interrupted by law enforcement, technically you're under arrest under Georgia law. But specifically, you have to be under arrest, and then they have to interrogate or question you about the situation that you're under arrest for. They can actually question you about other stuff, and they don't have to Mirandize you. I learned that the hard way in a couple cases. But the basis of the Vega case is that if you were arrested and the police violated Miranda, namely, they took a statement from you after warning you or not warning you that you whatever statement whatever statement you made could be used against you, you can't sue them. And that's a departure that continues to go down that path of the erosion of constitutional rights, because the only real protection for a civil rights violation is a lawsuit under 1983. And so 1983 is no longer available for those type of civil rights violations. And that's why this case is so important and we have to watch out for. But it was kind of a confusing conundrum there for a minute for many non-lawyers, because they thought that Miranda had been overruled.
All right. And Attorney Banjo, do you want to add anything to that?
President Griggs did a good job. What I will say is that, we know our system is imperfect, and we also know that we need to have checks and balances and holding folks civilly liable for their own actions, like Attorney Griggs mentioned, is one of the avenues. And I do, my concern is, folks now don't have the ability to hold folks accountable. And what we know from DA Austin Gaston and Representative Clark is it's a case by case basis. It happens on the local level. And so this is just another theme, another avenue that we're not going to be able to have as a tool to keep things in line. And so I think that it is definitely a cause for concern. And a lot of times when we're having these kinds of discussions, it's hard for me because I am thinking at like the end result. How can I fix it at the end of the day? That is all I can think about. And I think something that Representative Clark mentioned earlier was really important about the immediate elections that are happening. But I also think that we need to keep an eye out on future elections. And what we are seeing is that those who have the desire to restrict specific certain kind of rights are focused on the state level, they're focused on the local level, and clearly they're also focused on the Supreme Court, because they understand how each of them are interconnected, right? And so I think that at this juncture, our state legislature is, they're holding the line. The legislature and the local elected officials are the ones who are now tasked, unfortunately, with having to protect our rights, because at the federal level, we just simply don't have the votes, the requisite votes to implement the progress we need to protect the rights we are looking to protect.
Thank you for that. And District Attorney Gasson, anything you want to add to that conversation or discussion?
Come off. Okay. I'm on my cell phone. We just had a little mix up getting me on here. I think my computer just didn't like the system y'all were using, and now I'm having to tap my phone to get my mic on. But but I totally agree with that. I think where Jasmine is at, where Dr. Clark is at, it's all about our legislators protecting our rights. It's all about locally elected officials and, of course, defense attorneys. And I think that we really have to be very mindful of that and remind people, don't give up your voice, because if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. And it's critical right now. I think our democracy is really hanging on a hair, and if we don't push this, we will lose. And I think sometimes people just feel like, oh, this is the United States, we're good. But we have a lot of issues right now in the United States. And if we don't fight for our rights, it's just like something Coretta Scott King said once. She said, each generation has its own struggles and its own fights, that you cannot rest on thinking that you have rights. You have to fight for them in each generation. And I've always looked at that quote that she gave. I didn't quote it exactly as she said it, but each generation has a fight. And right now, as a country, I believe we are fighting for our democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I probably talk a little bit more about that at the end. But we do got a question in the chat from one of our political committee, action committee members, Steve Tarkerson. She's saying, and this is switching gears a little bit in terms of the court cases. I think this is the main case. It says, can we also discuss the Supreme Court decision that taxpayer money can now go to private schools, reinstituting segregation? Now, I was reading through the Georgia Constitution. They have some very strong language about separating church from state. So I guess Representative Clark, I don't know how, that wasn't one of the things I had you prepare for, but I guess can you give us a little feedback, I guess, on any of the language we got about that particular court case? Because I think what most people are worried about now is money, public funding, taxpayer money being pulled from public schools, which is already underfunded, and being pumped into these high-priced private schools, which are heavily segregated. A lot of non-white people are not in. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I can speak a little bit on it, in that I will say we already have some laws in place, and our state budget already has mechanisms in place where some of our public money is used for private schools. And every year they try to up that amount. And every year we have to fight against them increasing that amount, because ultimately I do not believe that it is right for public money to go to private schools. And I say this as someone who is not anti-private school. I went to private school for part of my education. My parents paid for it, though. I do think it's very important that we recognize that public money should go to public schools, because the right to an education is a right that is afforded to every child in the state of Georgia. That is a part of our Constitution. And so we need to fund those schools, and we need to fund them adequately. And every year we have people who come in and try to find a way to reword things in order to take some of that funding away and move it into other places. And that is at a disservice to our students, our families, and our communities who rely on public school education, as well as the teachers who dedicate their time and energy to delivering the best public education they can to the students that are in their charge. And so when it comes to things like separation of church and state, there are words there, and they should mean something. But what I've learned in my short time as a legislator is that sometimes people will push the envelope just to see what they can get away with. And if they get away with it, then they'll just keep on pushing. I'm not sure how many people on this panel are parents, but if you're a parent, you have probably experienced a child who has tried to push a limit just to see how far they can go before there is really a true consequence. And I think that's what we see here, where people are willing to do things. And let's be honest, one of the reasons why they're willing to push push the envelope, or try to, maybe do something that they know is not quite right, is because, back to talking about elections having consequences, things like judges and things, that those are, a lot of those are elected positions, but some of them are also appointed positions. So someone that got elected then got to appoint someone to sit on that bench, and they'll be sitting on that bench for a while. And thinking long term, thinking about judges and who appointed them. And I'm not saying this to say that judges are not impartial, because I do believe that some are, but I mean, we're seeing it right now with the Supreme Court. Sometimes they're not. And so sometimes people push the envelope because they feel in their bones that the people who are going to have to enforce the Constitution and enforce our laws are going to be on their side. And so thinking, of course, we have to care about this election, but as Maria said, we've also got to think big. We've got to understand the consequences of every person that we elect. They might not give you the warm and fuzzies, but guess what? They might be appointing a judge that's going to be quick to take your rights away, because they just don't care if you have those rights. So we got to think big. We got to think global sometimes when it comes to these elections. For any issue that you care about, any issue, think big.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that. And so we did have another question from Steve Targeson. Says, doesn't Dobbs, and I guess I throw this to State President Griggs, doesn't Dobbs' decision have an undue effect on minorities and poor people who may not be able to afford to travel to another state to receive abortion care?
Absolutely, and that's why it's important that it's an actual intersectional issue, because the greatest impact of the Dobbs decision will be on African American women, because they have the highest mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, because of the lack of access and lack of care. Many of our rural hospitals have closed, so many counties do not have OBGYN services or a hospital. So we know that people on the lower end of the economic ladder will feel the brunt of this because they won't be able to simply go to another state or go to another county to seek out health care. So of course, we're going to be on the receiving end of most of this with the recession of our civil rights. And so the Dobbs decisions is a clear impact on women's reproductive choices. And another thing that people aren't really talking about, but sort of, is the concurring opinion in Dobbs that start to talk about other rights that were drawn out of the penumbra idea, or that sprang out of it's called substantive due process. They sprang out of the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, that kind of drew in other rights. So that's the right to contraception, that's the right to marriage. Those are other rights, both interracial marriage and then homosexual homosexual marriages and civil unions. So it's a lot that to unpack in the Dobbs decision, and it gives us a roadmap. But again, African Americans, particularly African American women, will be impacted at a disproportionate rate because of the Dobbs decision. And that's why it's so important, as everyone has said, these elections have consequences because, you know, in Georgia, our judges are directly elected and are on the ballot in November, even though most of them are running unopposed, especially at the Supreme Court level. But we have to understand that these decisions have a real impact on your civil rights. And so that's why when I hear people have this conversation about, oh, I'm just going to sit this election out, you never really understand how much damage you can do, especially at a local level, by thinking like that. The decisions that are made in divorces, the decisions that are made with impact on your liberty, the decisions that are made with regard to real estate issues and domestic issues are all made by judges. They're made by judges in the judicial branch, and all of them in Georgia, all of them with the exception of the federal judges, are directly elected. And so you have an opportunity to talk directly about justice being on the ballot. And so with the Dobbs decision, this is a decision that will reverberate for generations. You know, the biggest thing that impacted me, you know, as a man in the Dobbs decision is the fact that I had to look at my 14-year-old who, you know, asked me after a couple elections, you know, Dad, is the world really changing? And I had to really have a conversation with her that she now has potentially less rights than her mother and her grandmother, all because of an election where a president was able to pick 3 Supreme Court justices that set women's rights back a generation. That's what we have to think about. And we as allies have to stop having conversations about other people's rights and become participants in the protection of those rights. You know, as a man, listen, whether you're pro-choice or you're pro-life, you should be pro-bodily autonomy for everyone. Because I promise you, if they were talking about a man's right to have a vasectomy being taken away from him and being forced upon him, this would be a completely different conversation.
Yeah.
And if I can jump in here really quickly. So Attorney Griggs mentioned something that's really important. And this is another reason why I will always organize with Attorney Griggs, is because understanding that we are still in a man's world, right? We are still in a society that is controlled by men. And when we're looking at what our forefathers did and folks before us in the civil rights movement, we know it wasn't only Black folks in the movement. We know that there were allies. We know that there are people who had power and privilege and influence that chose to wield it for the benefit of us. And that is all part of the whole. And so what I was just on a panel last week talking about this, you know, what I am looking for is for our men to stand up and be in the front, because at the end of the day, right, the majority on the Supreme Court is men. The majority of the folks making the decisions are men regulating women's bodies. And so, what say you men? What are we going to do to galvanize our brothers, our fathers, our uncles to now understand that this really impacts all of us and really understand how to use their power and influence to protect their sisters, daughters, mothers, and other women in the community? So that is one thing I always give acknowledgement to Attorney Greg, because no matter where he is, he's always uplifting and speaking truth to power. And at this juncture, truth to power means figuring out how we mobilize those in power and who have influence to use it to protect the women who need a partner in this movement to beat back the rollback of our rights.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Attorney Maria. District Attorney Gasson, did you have something to say? You just amen it. I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell if you wanted to jump in and say something.
I'm amening.
Okay.
Because, this is an important conversation that we need to have. And I'm with that. What Attorney Griggs said about men and vasectomies, I've been telling my husband this he gets so tired of me saying it. But basically, I told him if it was all about, if men were mandated when they are able to produce a life, that they were required to get a vasectomy and not have it reversed until they were married and with the family, that's never going to happen in this country. That's never going to happen. But I like the way the spin that you put on it, whereas the vasectomy, if they're being forced to populate, so that was a different spin on it. And I just know that we have to fight. We have to fight. It's just no other way around this. If we want people to have rights, we have to fight for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there was one other thing I wanted to add to that conversation, and this is for my brothers, because again, we have to be allies in this. In the Dobbs decision, in the concurrence, there is a direct attack on the right to contraception. And I'm saying this not only as a Black man, but I'm also saying this as an attorney. I hear a lot of my brothers having this conversation, but not seeing how it impacts you. If Justice Thomas's line of reasoning is continued to its ultimate accomplishment, there will be no right to contraception. And so as a man, that means no more condoms. That means no more Plan Bs. That means more child support and more laws that regulate men as fathers. And I know my brothers have a real problem with some of the laws, especially in the state of Georgia, that regulate the rights of fathers, namely people who have children out of wedlock. My brothers, if the right to contraception goes away and you're not married to the woman that has your child, you have no rights. So when we're having this robust conversation about a woman's right to choose, or the when life is determined in Georgia, just know that if we keep going down this road, you will turn from an ally into an accomplice, because your rights will be on the line, as you will be forced to pay child support for a child that you did not anticipate or had no parts in planning for. So this is about family planning. This is about understanding life decisions. And trust me, I have a very difficult time with this conversation, but I am a man. I should not dictate how a woman determines what's best for her body and her family. And so we need to have this conversation. And for the religious right,
President Griggs, President Griggs, I am so glad you said that religious right. Because that's where I was going to step in.
Because if we truly about pro-life, why does that concern end at the birth of the child? Georgia's what, 47th or 48th in education. We almost dead last in healthcare. I mean, we aren't producing jobs the way we need to for certain members of the community. So we pro-life. We pro-life for the complete life of the child, not just until they come into this world. So if we're going to have this religious conversation, you know, I think our God says we not only love the babies, but we love all his children and we take care of all his children. So if you're going to stand in line and adopt these children, and there's not a lot of people that want to adopt foster children in Georgia, let's have a real conversation, a robust conversation about this. Otherwise, you need to be quiet.
Can I just jump in really quick and just say something that I love that we're having this conversation. I love that we're having this conversation right now on YouTube and on Facebook. We need to have this conversation in barbershops. We need to have these conversations at church. We need to have these conversations wherever our male allies congregate, because I think the point that was just made is such a major point, but I haven't really heard this said outside of the circles who already know this. We got to get that message out to other people that you think this doesn't affect you because you will never get an abortion because you're a man. But let me tell you something. If we keep going down this road, this will affect you, and it's going to affect you very negatively, and you're not going to like it. And you're going to say, how did we end up here? How did we get here? And it started with complacency, or it started with the fact that you didn't care because you weren't going to get an abortion. So I would love to see this conversation happening, you know, in places that don't normally talk politics.
Well, and I also want to take it one step further, if I could. Things that were said just now pertaining to male, I want to take it further to our religious community totally also. Many people are afraid to tread here. But because who I am an older spiritual African-American woman who was raised by people who were raised by slaves. Grandparents were slaves. So I want to get real personal here. We were taught many different things that align with the religious right. But for me to walk in the places that I have been walking, for me to be a leader of a nonpartisan organization that covers the rights of all, I had to come to and reason with myself. I had come to the point that the God that I serve does not legislate morality. And what a big issue that has happened in our community is that people have been trying to politicize morality. And if we freely believe in this God that we talk about, he is a God of free choice. Free choice. He does not even make decisions for us. He gives us the power of free will. And that free will is determined by each and every person, whatever your house is. You know, as for me and my house, as for me and my four walls, as for me and my family, you make decisions that honor and cover your family. But again, the God that I serve, the God that I read about, the spirituality of God who loves each and every one of his children, no matter what they look like, no matter who they are, no matter who they choose, he is the only person that will not forsake us because of personal choices. So I want to stand on this ground as a person with a deep spiritual conviction, and I'm not using the word religious, spiritual conviction. We come from a God of freedom of choice who does not politicize religion and who gives his children free will. And that needs to be said in this conversation, and that needs to be made plain of all of those who want to tell others how to live, how to think, who to love, who to pull cover with, what decisions that they need to make. So I want to make sure I got that out.
And Attorney Gasson, I see you got your hand up. You can go ahead.
To what President Poole just stated, because I mean, this is from the inception of our beings. If you're spiritual, Adam and Eve had a choice. God said, you have a choice. And I like her words, that how she put it out there, because that's who he is. He is a God of choice. And it's not when you beat people down and try to make them a certain thing or a certain way, it's never going to work. And this whole thing with Dobbs and taking away a woman's right to her body, her own body, autonomy, and you got young girls being raped, and there's incest, and there's all kinds of things happening that's awful in our society, and you don't have an option for people, it's not going to end well. And I just hope that people, like Dr. Clark said earlier, and everyone else has said here, we have to vote. And we have to get people in place that will protect rights. We don't need to go the opposite direction of less rights.
All right, thank you. And again, I mean, as a person of African descent, I guess I can speak for all of us on here. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing is the difference in our spirituality and sort of this Euro-Christian concept. Because again, when we use that word, when life begins, you know, me being a person for African descent, we came from a place before we was here. And when our bodies die in this physical realm, we're going back to that place. So when we say life, I mean, at what point does it really end? If we believe the stuff we say we believe in that Bible, that we live eternally. So when does life really end? So again, I think a lot of that, we're seeing a lot of that being forced upon the entire country. Thank you, Ms. President Poole, D.A. Gasson, y'all great words on that particular topic. We'll move on to another court case, which was the EPA one. I think that was West Virginia versus the EPA, if I'm not mistaken here. My screen kind of jumped on over here, which kind of looks like with that particular case is going to, at least a lot of from what I'm hearing, even from my Jegna, Dr. Carr, you know, we feel like with them rolling back those rights from the EPA, that this will start affect other sort of regulators from being able to have sort of that enforcement power to kind of enforce, you know, different violations that they see are happening. So whether that's OSHA, whether that's some of these other government agencies that are given power to kind of swing the hammer when we have bad actors, look like with that particular ruling and the way the Supreme Court ruled, that's not only going to affect a lot of these EPA, you know, swinging the hammer at some of these companies that may be polluting in our communities, but it'll start affecting other government agencies from being able to enforce regulations on different corporations. So Attorney Griggs, I guess I'll start you off there. Can you speak on that particular case a little bit?
Yeah, so that's the EPA case you're talking about is
and I can just jump in here if you want, Attorney Griggs.
West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency.
Yep.
And basically what they were saying was the Congress did not grant the EPA agency under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act the authority to devise emission caps based on the generation shifting approach which the agency took in the Clean Air Plan. So basically what you got is the government was trying to place limits on the amount of fossil fuel and gas fumes that could go into the environment and pollute the air. And the Supreme Court said that if you read the statute as it's written, Congress didn't grant them that express power. And so my concern is with all of these decisions, they seem to be just kind of shotgunning it, because on one hand, you don't want big government, and on the other hand, you want to regulate government. So it's kind of confusing because, you know, I believe that this particular iteration of the Supreme Court were supposed to be originalist, which means the document should be interpreted the way it's written. And nowhere in the section 111D of the Clean Air Act did it actually say that they couldn't do this. Now, they read it very strictly and said, well, it didn't say they could either. So we're just going to draw it back. And you have to peel back what's really going on here. This is a pro-business decision. This means big business can continue to pollute. And so what we're seeing is a conservative bent on the court that's legislating from the court. And again, as somebody who grew up in the era of Scalia, it seems as though people who said they weren't activist judges are turning into activist judges. And so my concern is this is happening. What I would ask my brothers and sisters in the bar to do is to call this out, because, you know, in the third co-equal branch of the government, we try to be non-political. You know, we try to just, the law says this, we apply the law to the facts, and we get a result that people can trust. And that's why the courts have not been as politicized as the other two branches. But what's currently going on right now is the court is seeming to be becoming a political animal in and of itself. They used to try to avoid the political thicket, and they didn't try to have discourse on political issues. But it seems as though with this last term, the Supreme Court just threw all that out the window and just said, we're going to, if we don't like a law, we're going to adjust the law. And if we do like a law, we're going to strictly interpret that law.
Yeah, we're seeing legislation from the bench, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He brought up a really good point. You know, they're not consistent. They're just not consistent at all. And I think what we're seeing is that they are finding a end result that they want. And, you know, lawyers talk about it all the time. You can make an argument for anything, right? Either for or against. They're finding a result that they want. And when it's convenient for them, they're going to strictly or narrow the scope of how they're interpreting, how strict, you know, they're going to adhere to the Constitution. And if they want to depart from the norm, they will also find a reason. And I think what we're seeing is that they're not consistent on purpose because they have strategic long-term goal. And so, you know, I've been kind of thinking about, you know, where we are. And DA Austin Gaston talked about how we are in, you know, our democracy is in peril. And I feel like this is potentially a tipping point. We have 27 amendments, right, to our Constitution, right? If we are now finding ourselves where we have a Supreme Court who is going to be originalists when they feel like it and depart when they do, then now I feel like we need to figure out if we are in a tipping point where we're going to be able to potentially pass another amendment to protect the rights that we are seeing are under attack. Because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the country do not align or agree with the current makeup of the Supreme Court. And I keep mentioning how hard it is to have this discussion because I'm about fixing or finding solutions, is how can we get to a place where we are now in a good position to amend the Constitution so that we can now protect these rights that keep being chipped away.
Thank you for that, Attorney Banjo. Again, we got one more case to definitely discuss. I don't see any questions or anything in the chat right now. So we'll go to the final case, which they have not ruled on yet, but it's coming up. And that is the case that will affect who has power over the upcoming state election is Moore versus Harper. So I'm going to let Representative Clark, who look like she's chomping at the bit to talk about that case, and depending on how that case is ruled, how that would affect the state legislature.
Right. So again, I'm gonna start this. I'm gonna preface this by again stating just how important elections are, because you never know what might come out of this court. And it seems as if they are moving in the direction that they want to give state legislatures unlimited control over elections and redistricting. What I mean by that is they want to completely erase governors and the power of the veto out of that equation. They want to erase state courts out of that equation. They want to say that the state legislature has 100% control over elections. Now, if you remember in the last election, there were state legislatures or legislators who were trying to overturn election results. There were courts in place to serve as a system of checks and balances to stop some of these things. As well, across the country, and even here in Georgia, with redistricting, we saw unfair redistricting, unfair maps being drawn. And although we did not get that result in Georgia, in some parts of the country, courts sent those maps back and said, y'all know y'all wrong. Y'all know y'all wrong. Y'all should, no, don't even try it. We're going to get rid of all of that. That's literally what the Supreme Court decision is about. And so and you have to understand that a lot of the people who are making these decisions have kind of hinted to this idea in the past. And so it is very possible that they do rule that state legislatures have 100% unlimited, unfettered control over elections. And if they do, who's sitting in those state legislatures is going to matter more than people even realize. And I say that because when I go and knock on doors, there's a significant number of people who don't even know what a state representative is. And it's not their fault. It's not like we really teach these things. Everyone knows what a president is. You know, some people understand at least vaguely what Congress is and what the Senate is. They don't know all the details, but they at least know, like, they've heard the name Nancy Pelosi or they've heard the name Mitch McConnell. Like they kind of know vaguely what's going on. But once you get past that, when people start talking about state legislatures, they don't know. They don't know if I live in Washington or if I live at my house down the street. And so because of that, because of this lack of knowledge of just how important these state legislatures are, we have an uphill battle to educate voters to make sure they know. Because if the Supreme Court makes that ruling, the way we do elections in the future is going to be very different. And it's probably not going to be different on the side of civil rights and justice. And so if you care about any issue, I don't care what the issue is, if you care about any single solitary issue, whether that's reproductive rights, education, healthcare, guns, whatever right you care about, even if you're not on the same side of the aisle as me, whatever right you care about, understand that this ruling will make it to where that your ability to truly participate in our democracy could be in jeopardy with that ruling. So that's my perspective. Again, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not a Supreme Court scholar, but I've been paying attention to that one because I saw what they tried to do in 2020, and we cannot have a repeat of that. This opens the door of a repeat of that with them actually being successful. So we have to keep that in mind.
Okay. Attorney Griggs, did you have anything on that particular upcoming case and how that could affect us here?
Yeah, so basically the case, it revolves around several provisions of the United States Constitution, which sets for time, place, and manner upon which elections can be set. It's left solely to the state through the state legislature, and it can only be overturned by the federal government in certain circumstances. So basically, basically what it says is, and I'll pull that term up. It says here, the Constitution delegates to administer federal elections to the states subject to a congressional override. And it's a disagreement on how much power the state actors have. And so the clause is, it reads, the times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. Now, that statement is very innocuous, but people are reading into the statement that the independent state legislature is the final authority on elections, which means courts can't make any determinations, governors can't make any determinations. That legislature makes a decision. And why this is important is because, and again, NAACP is nonpartisan, but currently right now, there are, well, not hundreds, there are a lot of state legislatures that are run by one party that did not like the outcome of the last election. So now when you have these election deniers running around the country talking about election fraud, we got to overturn elections. Well, if you have the independent state legislature theory, this is a vehicle to overturn elections. And this is a threat to democracy because, again, and I would, again, talk to my originalist brothers and sisters in the bar who are trying to craft this argument, because right now, this argument is in the judiciary. And so lawyers are having this argument. But the last I remember in reading the Federalist Papers and talking about the founding philosophies of the Republic was that the founding fathers wanted 3 co-equal branches of government that could serve as checks and balances against each other, not one rogue actor. You know, we always talk about we can't have an unfettered monarch. Well, you also can't have an unfettered legislature. And so my question to them would be, if we go down this road of the independent legislature theory, what happens when you're not in control of that legislature? And so we gotta game all this out, because what's happening right now is America is at a crossroads of where their democracy will be. And again, elections have consequences. There are going to be times when you like the outcome of election. There are going to be times when you don't like the outcome of the election. But the solution to that is to organize and run people against that person or that body that you don't like, and then get the voters to show up. But, you know, carving out novel legal theories, which are fiction, because again, in that clause I just read, there's at least one check there, federal government, the Congress. So why wouldn't a court have that same power? And why would election law be different from any other law where the governor could potentially veto it and he needed 2/3 vote to override it? Why are we changing our constitutional scheme simply because somebody told a big lie? We have to make sure, as members of the bar, and this conversation is just to the lawyers right now, members of the bar, remember constitutional law. Okay, one of the first class you had to take civil procedure, and you had to take con law. This is not con law. This is something different. And you know, I would hope that the Supreme Court comes out on the right side of this, but they've taken the Moore case up, and given the last term, this potentially could be a problem where they could gerrymander even worse. They could overturn elections. They could craft elections law that are routinely discriminatory, and they could gut the Voting Rights Act. But my hope is that our constitutional system holds, and that the justices realize that their oath was to the Constitution and the decisions that have come before this. Because if we go down this road, you know, there are ways to defend the Constitution through peaceful civil disobedience that make sure that the constitutional precepts hold, and those individuals who were not thought of by the forefathers are real good at that.
You know, when I first read this, if I can jump in here, when I first read this case or the issue, what came to mind is a redundancy, right? This is a redundancy for those looking to have the control to overturn the will of the people, right? We know across the state, specifically in swing states, election deniers are running for Secretary of State. Their hope is that they get just one. And those that are looking to protect the democracy must get all of them to protect democracy. If for some reason they fail, this here will allow them to still move the needle forward. So I am not as hopeful at all about what kind of decision is going to come down when they do decide to take it up. So for me, and I know, before it came up, before then, it didn't really cross my mind, right? And to me, it feels so incredibly strategic and little by little. And, that's why I keep mentioning our ability to make sure we are protecting it on all fronts, and it's really hard because we're all tired. Every day it seems like the world is on fire, let's be honest, right? But we have to understand the other side, they're not tired. They're not tired. They're well funded. They have time. They have time for us. They have time to erode our democracy and our rights. So when I was reading this, I was like, this is a redundancy. This is a what if they don't get one of those Secretary of State's positions in November. How are they still going to look towards 2024? So I'm not hopeful. I don't know if I'm just a bad day, but we shall see.
Thank you. Again, we're gonna remain optimistic because at the end of the day, I mean, we survived a lot. They've been trying to get rid of us for 400 years, and we still here, and still growing, not only domestically but internationally as well. At this time, since we're toward the end of our program, I'm going to ask each person to give a call to action. I'll go last because my call to action, I'm going to let an ancestor speak for me at this time because I think what he's going to say is going to be very important. But I'll let everybody go with the call to action. State President Attorney, I'm getting naming all your titles. State President Griggs, I'm going to let you go first with yours.
Yeah, again, I'm thankful to the NAACP in Gwinnett County who have been on the front lines for a long time in this fight, and just happy to be here. My call to action is we have to recognize the fierce urgency of right now. We are seeing things happen in our democracy that are unprecedented. It feels like over the last 5 years, we've gone through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, all in 4 years. And so if we don't understand where we are historically, you will miss it and you will get tired. But for 400 years, our ancestors never got tired. And we've seen all these tricks before. We've seen the codification of separate but equal, or Jim Crow laws, or slave codes, or whatever legal theory that based in nothing become the law. So we're not used to this. But what we have to do is summon the organizing spirit of our ancestors, that we shall not be moved and we will also not be fooled. I always bring up the fact that, certain members of the bar keep touting this belief that they are originalist. And if you truly are an originalist, interpret the Constitution the way it's written and stop drawing in all of these exceptions. Because if you interpret it the way it's originally written, liberty and justice will flow to all Americans and the millions that want to become Americans. This country can be great for the first time if it truly lives up to its creed and the words that are written on paper. Not all this other stuff. The country is changing. It's becoming more diverse. We have to accept that diversity, because if you don't accept that diversity, you will be forced to repeat the sins of the past, and your ancestors will remember your tweets, your posts, and your hatred the same way they remember your ancestors' lynchings. They remember their cross burnings. They remember their Klan rallies, and it's all being recorded on the internet. So, do you want your great-grandchildren to look back at you with shame and try to pass laws that ban the teaching of this history today? Or do you want to be a part of that glorious future where America truly does become that city that sits on a hill that is the beacon to the rest of the world? Because the world is watching, and the world is ashamed of what they see right now. But what I see is the dawning of a new day. We are in a new era. They always want to talk about the civil rights era. Well, the great thing about the civil rights era is they taught us to look towards the social justice era. And that's what we're in right now. So again, we see you. We see you quite clearly. We overcame the last few Supreme Courts that wanted to say Plessy versus Ferguson was good law, or that wanted to say the slaughterhouse cases were good law, or wanted to say we'll never have Brown. So again, we're ready for this fight. And there's not just one Thurgood. The association's been in this fight for over 114 years, and we will continue to fight. And when we fight, we win. Thank you.
Thank you, State President Griggs. District Attorney Gasson, I know you've been kind of quiet. I'm going to let you go next. I know that I'm putting you on the hot seat going behind State President Griggs, but go ahead, please. Your call.
I say that was a wonderful call to action. And I was discussing some things with some friends today. At some point, the all of the division in our country is going to have to heal. And to get there, I think spirituality will need to be called upon. At some point, we will have to forgive, and love each other, and understand that we are who God made us to be, each and every one of us. And it's a thing of, we have some good folks, like you all were talking about earlier, alliances with other people that stepped into a lot of the movements that we've had in our history and helped. And one thing I got from the 2020, when the young folks were out protesting George Floyd, and you saw them right here in Gwinnett County in different places, it was a mixture of kids, white kids, Korean kids, Chinese, Spanish, everybody was out there. And just looking at those young people gave me a strong sense of optimism. And I think if we can somehow empower that spirit that they have as a community, they didn't care. They were out there protesting murders of Black men, and they were not Black. So I think we're going to have to get to a point of dealing with what we have there in our young people. I think that's, to me, that is the future. Because even when you talk about the January 6th sedition, I call it that, because it was more than just a gathering of people. It was more than just a riot. They tried to take over the government and change what the voters wanted. There was a young man that turned in his own father because he was part of that whole sedition. And I think that if we get to our young people, even though folks are trying to ban books, folks are trying to stop knowledge from going forward, they're not stopping. I just spent 10 days with our junior DAs and investigator mentorship program, and I was so impressed, so hopeful watching these young people. Of course, us being the elders, we have a lot of work to do still. But I think we fight, and we fight hard so that we can leave a legacy of freedom, respect, and love. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And Attorney Maria Banjo, I'm going to let you go next. What's your call to action?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Once again, I really do appreciate having this wonderful discussion and being part of this very phenomenal panel. My call to action, centers more around how we hold elected officials accountable without depressing the vote. without discouraging our neighbors or folks from trying to withhold their vote, right? Because we know that this is an imperfect system, this is an imperfect country, and we're all doing our best to move the needle forward. So that's one thing. And the second thing that's really been near and dear to my heart is, the divide that I see growing within our community and how we can build a bridge to come together for the betterment of our community. And when I say what I mean is that, divide and conquer has been a tried and true tactic by those in power, right? Pitting the have-nots against each other, creating a false sense of scarcity around resources, telling us that the other is a part of the problem and is reason why you don't have, when it's in fact the person with the power and privilege. And I think DA Austin Gaston made a really good point about in 2020, the broad-based coalition of people. It wasn't just Black people out there fighting for Black lives, advocating for Black lives. And I think that when we're talking about our community, there is, in a lot of ways, a regression, in my opinion, as far as between Black immigrants that come into our country and Black descendants of slaves, right? And figuring out what the differences are, but the areas of agreement and how we can organize together. Because at the end of the day, right, a bullet and officer isn't going to know the difference between one or the other, right? And how do we advocate for whole and complete justice for everyone? And what does that look like? And that answer is going to be different based on your own historical background. So my call to action is how we come together more and focus more on the actual issues at hand. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. State Representative Clark.
All right. First, I want to say thank you for having this conversation. I'm so glad that this conversation is having. And actually, that is my call to action. We had a great conversation tonight. We talked about some stuff. We got really down to it. President Poole talked about how you can be spiritual and still advocate for civil rights, such as the right to have bodily autonomy. President Griggs talked about how men still have a dog in the fight when it comes to bodily autonomy. We've had a lot of conversations today that I would really, really hope that don't stop here. One of the things I love about social media is that it can be used for good. Now, it's not always used for good, let's be honest, but social media can be used for good and that we can spread our message far and wide. But I'm going to be really honest. Sometimes we can't rely on social media all the time. Sometimes we have to have real, true, authentic conversations at the dinner table, when we had a little family get together, when we, go and watch a sporting event, or when we're out with people who, again, may not be particularly engaged in the political process, but everything that happens in the political process is still going to affect their lives. And the things that they are talking to you about, when they're talking about how they're feeling at the gas pump, or when they're talking about, the fact that they're feeling chest pains, but they can't afford to go to the ER, when they're talking to you about the fact that, their kids had to do Zoom, but they don't have internet in their area, all those issues that they do care about are there's someone pulling the strings. There are people in positions of power that are pulling the strings, and they have the ability to communicate with those people. They have the ability to elect those people. But we got to talk to people. We got to have just regular, normal, everyday. It doesn't have to be all highbrow and big words and high vocabulary. Let's just talk to people one-on-one, face-to-face, get down and dirty. Tell them, look, man, you need to care about this because I know you don't want to pay child support, We gotta keep it real. So let's have some real, authentic conversations in real, authentic ways. It doesn't always have to be a panel. I love panels like this because somebody is listening. But sometimes we got to take it off the internet, and we got to take it to the streets. We got to take it to the house. We got to take it to the basketball court, take it to the barbershop. Let's do that. So my call to action is take something that you learned today, or something that you've learned over the course, or something that you have ingested during this time that is giving you a tummy ache, and you talk about it to other people out in the streets. Let's do that.
Thank you. Thank you, State Representative Clark and President Poole. Call to action. Gwinnett NAACP president. I'm going to take you off mute because I think you're on mute.
I want to thank each and every one for your comments and input. First off, I want to say that the Gwinnett NAACP is a family-centric organization seeking the beloved community to eliminate poverty, institutional racism, and militarism. And I say all that to say that we are here. We are here about policy. We're here about policy. We're here about making relationships, building relationships, and building alliances with people who have like policy issues and goals that we have. What seems to be happening now is that all of these policy issues, African American people are at the bottom of it. So if we're talking African American, it's not that we are not looking at other people's plights, but it is us who are at the bottom of health and infant mortality. It is us who is at the bottom of housing and still unable to own housing. It is us who is talking in Gwinnett County about education and not getting the rights that we need, and that the SROs are suppressive and have their knee on our neck. It is us talking about economic development. So it's not that we're walking in a narrow path, but we're walking in the path of the downtrodden and people who are not having their rights and not equitable distribution of resources and monies. So I want to say this, and I want to make this loud and clear. Just because you look like us, that don't mean you're for us. So we're not even on that side of you look like us that we are partnering. No, we are partnering with people who are making positive policy to help the marginalized and those who are not getting equitable distribution of resources. Again, just because you look like us, hey, we want you to know that we need to look at your records, and the NAACP will be looking at your record. Just because you look like us and try to sound like us, if your policies are not in line with those for the people who need, we're not aligned with you. So we are educating and informing. Now, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. However, we are teaching people to understand what is happening to them, and that we cannot keep having insanity doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. We cannot do it. So we stand here today. We need you to listen. We need one individual to step up. We need you to use your voice. Again, because you look like us, that does not mean you're for us. We are about policy. We are about having those who are marginalized. Again, our call to action is people, especially here in Gwinnett, where we are on the front lines with the attacks, to let your voice be known, to have those conversations, to speak honestly, like our Representative Clark said, like our DA Gaston said, like our beloved state president said, like Maria Banjo said. We have to speak up and not be afraid and not be ashamed, and say the things are needed to be said, and ask the questions that need to be asked. I'm sorry for getting up on my soapbox, y'all, but y'all know it's real, and y'all know I'm not lying. And if we don't tell the truth, nobody else will. Hey.
Amen.
That was wonderful. Need to be said.
First of all, I definitely want to thank all our guests for coming on. My call to action, I'm not gonna do a call to action. I'm gonna let this ancestor speak for me, because I think this moment is very fitting for us to discuss. So I'm gonna let him speak. I'm gonna play about 4 minutes of this video because his call to action is my call to action to our people. So I'm gonna let him speak for us.
Once
Baba Kwame Ture.
Form the mass movement of the 1960s to mass organization has been central to us.
And many people watching this, and I would say to you too, history has gone somewhere else. And it is now with when you look at the number of African Americans, who are participating in the Clinton administration in positions of power in the president's cabinet, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is a black man and an African American, and a whole sense of while all the problems remain and the disparities in income distribution and all of that, there is, in a sense, a continued growth in political participation and in the assumption of power, especially at the local level and the state level, and more so on the national level in the political arena. And therefore, the kinds of ideas that you're articulating don't have the resonance that they used to.
Oh, I would not agree at all. We have to not agree.
Let us take Los Angeles.
Okay, go ahead.
Simply.
Los Angeles
The
example.
simple example. Great example.
In 1965, there was a rebellion in Watts.
Right.
In 1992, there was a rebellion in Los Angeles. In 1965, none of the things that you just advocated were true. In 1965, Sam Yorty was mayor. We had no mayors. In 1992, Tom Bradley is a mayor.
Right.
In 1965, we had no mayors to speak of. In 1992, Africans in America have over 300 mayors in the country. But all of these changes,
Detroit and Atlanta, some of them,
the biggest
New
cities,
York,
biggest cities in
some of the
the
biggest
world,
cities.
biggest cities in the country.
Right.
And we have now some 7,000 elected officials. Matter of fact, Africans in America have more elected officials than any other ethnic group in the country. And yet, we have no power at all. So all of these changes have been...
But how would you define no power then?
I'm coming to show you no power. The fact that the conditions of life of the masses of our people are worse today in Los Angeles than they were in 1965 show that we have no power. We have a lot of visibility. Jesse Jackson seen all over television, he has no power at all. None whatsoever. So they give us visibility but no power. So the conditions of the masses, because there's no power, becomes worse, not better.
But I don't think Kurt Smoke would say he has no power, the mayor of Baltimore.
He has no power.
Why would you say he has no power?
Well, let me talk about that.
Okay, but wait, let me just say one thing right there. Why would you say he has no power? He's the mayor of Baltimore. I mean, he's trying to do things to affect not only African Americans, but other Americans in Baltimore. And he has more power than...
I'll tell you why he has no power.
Okay.
For us, power can come only from our organized masses. All of our power to bring change in this country come from mass struggle. That's clear. So if the power comes from mass struggle, it is clear to change things. Political power can only come from the organized masses to ensure those changes. And since the masses of our people are not organized, he can have no power at all. None whatsoever. If he does, where's his power base? It certainly is not the masses of his people. And if it's not the masses of his people, the power base must be used against his people.
Lane.
Well, I go back to fundamental.
All right. So that's my call to action. My call to action is for our people to join not only the Gwinnett NAACP or any NAACP in your jurisdiction, but also calling upon our Divine Nine, our Masons, all our different organizations that we have in Black institutions, and for us to use these institutions to leverage the type of power that Baba Kwame Ture was talking about. Again, it's not about getting one political Black politician elected. We have to show up to these school board meetings. We have to show up to these county commissioner meetings. We have to show up to these state legislative meetings. So not only do we want you to vote, we definitely want you to do that. 2022 is one of the biggest elections in the state of Georgia. You need to know who's making these laws. You know, who's responsible for these laws that's not teaching the truth in education? Who's responsible for these laws that's making it harder for us to vote with Senate Bill 202? Again, I'll make one correction we had tonight. Judges are elected in May elections, in primary elections. So we did just have the judicial election this past May. So again, we not only need you to just vote, but we need you to get involved. We need you to come to our committee meetings and strategize with us. Bring, as I'll take a saying from Karen Hunter, bring your brick. Join our organization, find out where your skills and your talents will fit in with our organization. If you don't want to join the NAACP, join Black Voters Matter, join Black Lives Matter, join the Urban League or any other organization that may be out there, community movements. There's so many different organizations across the country, but find an organization to join and organize with that organization and strategize with that organization and come to these meetings where policies and monies are being distributed. We can't have a conversation about reparation when we're not even getting the maximum tax dollars that we putting into the tax bucket now. And the only way that changes is not only should we go to the polls and vote come early vote in October and come actual election day in November, but after the election ends, after the voting ends, come into our organizations and strategize and organize with us, and let's plan and organize together and mobilize together to come to these meetings where the policies are being made, where the government monies are being distributed into our communities, in this case, not into our communities. So that's what Baba Kwame Ture is talking about. It's more Black people elected now than ever before, any point in history, but we have no power. And the power is because we're not part of any organization. Individuals don't beat institutions. So you have to be part of some type of institution and organizing with that institution to help change our conditions. So that's my call to action for tonight. Again, thank you to our guests. Thank you for all the people that watched and commented on tonight's program. President Poole, do we have any closing remarks or closing announcement we want to make? Oh, before I turn it over to her, her birthday is, I think, tomorrow. So happy birthday. But any closing remarks, President Poole? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you to everyone, especially our Secretary Adrian Johnson, who does such a wonderful job in helping to put these events together. Thank you, Adrian. And everyone, and if I did not call your name, no, please count it to my head and not my heart. The panel, we appreciate you being transparent. We appreciate you being open. And these are the conversations that will project us or to the next level. Again, thank you. Our events, again, please support our youth in their meeting this Saturday, which will be virtual from 12 to 1 on our platform, our social media platforms. Excuse me. Please support our home buyers initiative that will be at Berean Christian Church in Gwinnett on the 30th. Our state of Georgia NAACP conference is a partner. Berean Church is a partner. Of course, NAACP, who will be leading this charge. Please come out and support this. We want to bring affordable housing so that people will be able to stay here, their families strive and thrive. And on that Sunday, again, our back to school rally, we are still looking for donations. Please donate. And again, in September, put it on your calendar, the third Tuesday in September, National Voter Registration Day. When we're talking, it's not just to us, but this 6 degrees of separation is real. Tell someone to tell someone who tells someone else, and we can get these messages to everyone who needs to hear it. If that's it, I really want to step aside for my president. And do you have any announcements from the state, President Griggs?
Just that we will be at national convention starting on the 14th with the AXO competition, national AXO competition, where we have numerous people competing from the state of Georgia. And then, of course, we will have the national convention from the 16th through the 20th. We're fired up and ready to go in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I believe it's the 114th national convention of the association. And it should be powerful. And then we'll be back in Georgia getting ready to push out the vote. As many people have said, National Voter Registration Day is coming. We have to make sure that we are registered to vote. Then we'll be educating and mobilizing to the polls for November the 8th for the most consequential election of our lifetime. And then we'll be holding elected officials accountable, because just like I call him Stokely Carmichael, many call him, a lot of other things, but he is the originator of the Black Power movement. We're going to be speaking truth to power, and we're going to be holding individuals accountable. But we can't do that unless we are organized, and we have to organize within institutions, as he said. And this is one of the best institutions to get organized with, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We've been doing it for 114 years. You guys can come join us. We have some of the baddest social justice, civil rights activists to ever walk the face of the earth. And we are recruiting the rest. So come join us. If you can make it to Atlantic City, please join us. If you can't make it, it will be live streamed on all the NAACP platforms, on the Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, and then we'll be back in the state of Georgia getting in some good trouble. So come join us at the NAACP. If you live in Gwinnett County, join the NAACP. They're always on the front lines. If you're around the state, there are 109 branches. Pick a branch, join that branch, and let's get to work.
Okay, thank you. And I want to turn it back over to you, Edward. We can close out, or let me, if you want to close out, and then we'll end with a prayer, because again, we are family centric. Any other closing remarks?
No closing remark. You can pray us out.
Okay, if not, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity this evening for us to come together with one accord, seeking your will and your way for our community. We hope that there was something said, Lord, that pricks someone's spirit, that let people know that we are here for the good. Lord God, we want to make sure that whatever happens, that it is for your glory and your honor. Father God, bless each and every household represented. Bless those who were listening in. We hope that we prick someone's spirit, that they may come aboard and walk and seek your will to do the good of the people. It is the matchless name of my God, Jesus, I pray. Please pray to your God. Amen. Amen. And amen.
Amen.
Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you for having us.
I'm going to dismiss our guests. You all have a great rest of your night. And again, please come back and join us at 12 o'clock Saturday for our Gwinnett Youth Council meeting, which they'll have a discussion around entrepreneurship. Have a good night, everyone.